When last we had read of Yuka, she had had a brush with death, seen friends lie slain, and chosen to take up with the caravan party from Kamden. And now we see how that new trail of her journey goes. Try this. I promise it will help. Lusa handed a steaming clay mug of something black and smelling of war pine needles to Yuka. Yuka kept her eyes fixed on the embers of the smoldering morning cook fire, willing herself to keep awake. Sleep weighed down her eyelids, heavier with every breath. She felt that at any moment she would fall off the petrified tree stump that she sat upon and pass into the sweet realm of sleep. For the moment, only the pain in her ribs and head were what kept her from sleeping where she sat. Yuka reached up and felt the days-old bandage wrapped around her head. The bruised cut she had received from the misfired Spitfire while fighting the Skycriers alongside her aunt ached and itched horribly. Her recently reset nose also throbbed mercilessly with every heartbeat. Do all legends hurt this much? She thought to herself. She reached for the mug and took a deep inhale of the liquid scent. Rotted henniper? She asked Lusa, who sat next to her at the fire, holding a mug of her own. The woman chuckled. No, girl. No leaf of henniper, no starleaf, nor plant of yokehead made this powerful brew. She took a long sip of her own cup. This is made from the dark leaves of the vast, mysterious South. The Kamden have massive fields devoted to growing them. The people of the southern lands cannot get enough of the strong tang of this plant. She smiled to herself. Some say these little leaves give all life to Kamden's trade and their imperial endeavors. Drink, girl. Please. Respect that wars have been fought over what is boiled in your cup. After a slight hesitation, Yuka took a long draw from the cup. The sharp, zesty flavor followed the heat immediately. The flavor was so strong Yuka almost coughed. All feeling of sleep left her eyes in moments. Wars have been fought, truly, over this. She took another sip, uncertain still of whether or not she liked it. Yuka nodded. Wait a moment for the tea's properties to take effect. You would be surprised at what fools would draw blades for. She stood, draining the last of the liquid in her own cup and tossing the dregs into the fire. Come. Finish your cup, then earn your keep. The caravan is packing up, and Falhurst wants us to ride ahead to the village not far from here. Does he wish us to trade with them? Yuka asked, between drinks of the dark southern leaf tea. Lusa shook her head. He means to warn those around of our passing, and to pay respect. These are odd times for trade, and the tribes of these hills are wary of any who travel this near to the coming winter. Is your bedroll packed? Yuka nodded. She had been given a bedroll by Lusa to sleep in the night before. She had only managed to sleep a few short hours before under the shelter of Lusa's tent, when they had returned from the sight of the hanged men. Yuka had barely been able to close her eyes last night. The image of their path back to camp being lit by a hurried pyre of dead, burning oarsmen still haunted her. Such an end for Takani's oarsmen still made her feel sick to her stomach. But it was not Takani's end, she told herself over and over in her thoughts, barely believing them. Yuka hurried back to the small tent next to them and grabbed her packed bedroll. Are we riding? She could hear a smile in Lusa's response. 4 legs are better than 2. Don't worry, you'll get used to the animal yet. Yuka groaned. Riding the steed back to camp had been difficult enough. She felt awkward on top of the beast, unsteady. You'll get your own today. I've picked a quiet-hearted one from Falhurst's team. Lusa pulled her own pack from the tent. She reached inside the pack and handed something to Yuka. Yuka stared down at the worn, polished handle of one of the smaller sorts of Spitfire she had seen before. Yuka looked up at Lusa. I've never used one. Lusa held the weapon up to her. And you won't today, hopefully. Fret not. It is not loaded. Today it is more for you to be seen carrying it than anything else. Yuka took the weapon, weighing it uncertainly in her hand. The wood and metal tool felt heavier than she would have thought it to be. Will it just be us going? Lusa rolled her eyes to that question. Alas, no. Falhurst demanded that we have an escort from the caravan to the village. I told him that was unnecessary. But there are times that the man is deaf to my sense. In fact, I am due to check on with our escort now. Lusa took the empty cup from Yuka's hands. I need you to get across camp, to the healer's tent, the man who fixed you up yesterday. Lusa pointed back towards somewhere across the camp, behind Falhurst's massive tent. He has his own wagon and horse team. It's the small black wagon near the creek bank. There you will find it. Yuka nodded. Is he coming as well? No. He holds something for me that we are to give to the village. Hurry along now. I want to get riding that way before the sun is over the tree line. Yuka tucked the small Spitfire into her belt at her waist and began hurrying through the already busy camp. All around her, people were putting out cook fires, hitching up teams of furry steeds to wagons, and preparing for another day's journey. Yuka smelled the sharp tang of the black tea once more, and looked over her shoulder to see a group of pale women in white robes standing around a fire, drinking the steaming liquid from odd metal cups, while their tents were packed up by the young men wearing brown coats and trousers. Ahead of Yuka, men with the single braids of hair in the center of their heads and scarred faces were saddling their own horses and slipping long curved blades and Spitfires into the leather straps and slings on their horses. Some stopped to stare at her. One large man with black hair in his braid had a mustache so thick it covered most of his mouth. He gave her an odd, unsettling grin. Yuka avoided their eyes and continued to look through all the bustling chaos for a black wagon. It was then that she heard her name from a familiar voice. Yuka! She turned to see the bright, petite Ennui waving not 10 paces away to her left. Ennui was hard not to miss. Once more she was wearing her deep red cloak. Underneath, the girl wore a dark brown coat studded with bright copper buttons and matching trousers. Yuka was almost envious at the high leather boots the girl also wore on her feet. The leather was dyed black and looked to be well made. As she neared, Yuka could tell that thick, closely knit fur from some southern animal lined the boots. The brown coat that she wore matched that of the other servant boy she had seen in Falhurst's tent. Yuka felt a pang of angered sympathy for the girl as she tried to push the word slave once more from her mind. Ennui stood next to a small raised wagon that had been painted black, with dark brown canvas covering it. The small, pale man that had spent an afternoon healing Yuka emerged from the wagon shortly, holding a tightly packed package wrapped in light brown leather. He handed it to Ennui, then looked up, meeting Yuka's gaze. Yuka marveled once more at the odd side of the man. Aside from his height and alarmingly pale skin, the thick eye coverings he had worn atop his head yesterday were now covering his eyes. Snow and sunlight were reflected darkly on the thick black glass and brightly on the polished brass that framed them. He looked like he should not be able to see a thing through these coverings, but he smiled and beckoned Yuka over to his wagon. Yuka went over to them. The small man gave a small bow to Yuka, and then said something quickly to Ennui. Ennui nodded and turned to Yuka. He says that he longs to know if your nose is half as painful still, she said, weighing her words in Yuka's language carefully. Yuka reminded herself that her expected duties while with this party were to aid this girl's understanding in her tongue. No, she said, wincing at the slight throb in her nose. It is better than yesterday. Ennui spoke these words back to the healer. His smile widened, and he nodded. What is your word for thanks? Yuka asked Ennui. The girl's head tilted, and she grinned. She gave the word to Yuka. Yuka in turn pointed to her nose, ribs, and hand, saying the same word to the healer. The man nodded once more, then placed a hand across his thick, muscled chest and spoke. Magrave. Yuka looked to Ennui, uncertain of what the word meant. His name, she answered the unspoken question. Yuka placed a hand over her own chest and said, Yuka. Magrave bowed, then said something more to Ennui. He says he's believing you that you are here to take Luce's potions. Yuka had no idea what a potion was, but she nodded. Magrave quickly climbed into his raised wagon and disappeared under the thick canvas. A moment passed where Yuka felt the morning wind around them kick up fiercely. She shivered and pulled her now dry jaka coat tighter around her. Looking down, she saw that the thin girl was also feeling the morning chill with difficulty. The poor thing was wrapping her hands inside some unseen pockets within her cloak, and shivering. I doubt that she ever felt a cold wind like this in her southern home. Cold? Yuka asked her. Much, Anhui said, smiling through the shiver. Tea? Yuka mimed, drinking a cup. Anhui shrugged. Later, I wish. Magrave emerged from his wagon. He carefully stepped back onto the snowy ground and held out a rectangular wooden box that was making a metal clinking sound with his every movement. The healer opened the box's hinged lid and showed Yuka the contents. Yuka saw that the box had wooden frames built within, sectioning 12 even spaces within the box. Each frame held a thin glass bottle that was filled by a honey and amber-colored liquid. Each was sealed with a small cork and wax. It was difficult to tell, but it looked as though each bottle was also held by a quick brass fastening. Yuka took the box from him and said the Kamden word for thanks once more. Magrave placed his hand over his heart and nodded once more. Anhui spoke the same word to him and looked to Yuka. She gestured back to where Falhurst's tent and Luce's tent were in the camp. Together, she said. Yuka nodded, and the two carried their charges back to their respective masters. As they walked, Yuka wished she knew more of Anhui's words, or at least had better knowledge of what Yoked words Anhui knew. The silence prolonged as they made their way between the others, moving about the camp. Yuka was not sure if she should try to fill the quiet with conversation. She decided to try anyway. You ride with Falhurst today? She was relieved that Anhui nodded, apparently understanding her meaning. Every day. You ride with Lusa? Yes. The two reached the edge of Falhurst's campsite. The young men in the brown coats and trousers were hurrying to break down the tent. The two massive hounds that had guarded the entrance to the tent the day before were barking at them and everyone else who passed from inside one of the great canvas wagons nearby. Yuka saw Lusa speaking to Falhurst near the wagon. She suddenly felt a hand on her arm and turned to see Anhui's bright face. Her brow was furrowed, and she looked to be thinking very hard about something. Happiest that you are staying with us. Yuka laid a hand over Anhui's and smiled. She said the Kamden word for thanks once more. Anhui giggled. Her cheeks were turning a bright pink. Her hand suddenly came up, and Yuka flinched as Anhui took a thick strand of her hair between two of her fingers. Your hair. How is it cold? Yuka fingered one of the copper rings in another strand of her hair. Red, she said simply. Red, Anhui said the word a few times. She spoke carefully again, letting go of Yuka's hair. Falhurst said that the knife you used yesterday night be yours. She nodded to the long dagger slid into Anhui's belt. Her eyes came back up to Yuka's. A short, awkward moment passed between the two. I will see you at camp this night. Anhui gave a small nod and hurried back to where the other servants were breaking camp. Falhurst gave a nod of farewell to Lusa and mounted his massive furry steed once more. Lusa turned towards the approaching Yuka. Took you long enough. We're burning through the morning, girl. Come on now. She patted the small furry gray animal by her side. A small saddle had been belted around the animal's waist. Yuka felt her chest tighten at the thought of riding this thing anywhere at speed. Give it here. Lusa impatiently took the box and carefully stowed it into the large leather pack she wore strapped over her shoulder. With an annoyingly effortless movement, Lusa hiked up her leg, got her foot into the stirrups of her own saddle, and pulled herself up onto the beast. She motioned for Yuka to do the same. You could have waited to help, Yuka called up to her. Lusa shrugged. Then you would not have this chance to do it yourself. Come now, child of the green, with Kanken of the black. No child of a greeneresh should fear plant or beast. Yuka swallowed a curse and carefully made her way to the animal. The first steed was taller than her, but smaller than most like it, from what Yuka had seen. It seemed to not even notice she was there. She raised a tentative hand. At the movement, the animal gave its long head a little shake and took a step to the side, away from her. Yuka heard Lusa sigh impatiently once more. She was about to just grab onto the tan saddle to haul herself up, but memory stayed her action. An image from back when she journeyed the Warpine Grove with her mother came to Yuka. They had stood before a young female Jaka that had bent its head near where they rested to take a drink from a thin brook that they camped at the night before. Yuka had never been this close to a female Jaka before, and she had never seen a more beautiful creature. Her young self had wanted to leap over the brook and reach out to the creature immediately, but her mother stopped her. Though they will never speak, you can still communicate with any living thing. Choose your moves carefully, and watch for how it reacts. Now, Yuka brought herself around to the front of this animal she was meant to ride. She removed one of her gloves and brought her hand under the nose of the animal, keeping her movements slow. The massive nostrils of the beast flared as it considered her scent. After a moment it brought its head forward, nestling its snout into Yuka's palm. She giggled at the odd sensation of the warm air and wetness coming from the nose. "Well done getting acquainted, now hurry up and mount, girl." Yuka walked back around the animal and took her time to carefully lift herself up with the stirrup into the saddle. The animal did not balk at her as she rose atop it. She felt a rush of relief and looked over at Lusa. The woman gave a smile and a begrudging nod. She brought her mount in front of Yuka's. "Now that you're finally ready, we may finally get to our tasks." She nodded at the stirrups in Yuka's saddle. "Grab hold of those now and edge the animal along with your legs and heels. Be gentle, or you'll run the both of you into a snowdrift. Once we get going, your animal will follow mine well enough. If you need to slow down, call out and gently pull back on the stirrups." Yuka nodded. "How far is the village?" Lusa gestured down towards the long snowy path leading south. "If we are lucky, we shall make it there before midday. I mean to end our business quickly and meet up with the camp well before sundown. And here are our escorts." Yuka heard a begrudging sourness in Lusa's last words. Turning, she felt a lurch in her belly as she saw two of the scarred, pony-tailed men walking their horses over to the two of them. One was a younger man, with nut-brown hair in his braid and a thick beard. The other was a large man with the great black mustache whose eyes had watched Yuka so carefully on her way to Magrave the healer. He gave a similar grin to her now, tilting his head. Lusa gave a stern word of greeting to the two men, then said a few sentences that Yuka could not understand in word or context. She gestured with her arm down the pathway she had indicated earlier, then waved her hand behind Yuka. The men gave her stoic nods. Yuka could not get over the looks in the eyes of these men. The younger man had hazel eyes, the color of autumn pine. The man with the black mustache had eyes the color of stone. Yuka decided not to look very closely into either of their eyes any time soon. Lusa waved Yuka over to her. Carefully she nudged her steed, along with her heels. "I've told them that they are here for Falhurst, not us. They are to not ride ahead, nor ride close to us. They ride 50 paces back at least to keep watch for any dangers." Yuka looked back and made note of the thick curved blades and spitfires tucked into the slings of these men's saddles. They were armed to the teeth. Though it would be next to useless in her own hands, Yuka now wished that the spitfire Lusa had given her was loaded. "Are they a danger to us?" Lusa gave a dark chuckle. "I'd have them slit and singing to the red wind before their sabers cleared their sheaths. All the same, child." Lusa looked hard into Yuka's eyes. "Keep close to me. Never trust a jailer." She nodded at the two men. With that, Lusa put her heels to her mount and began riding down the path. Not wanting to be alone with the two scarred men for even a moment, Yuka put her heels to her own mount and hurried after. The day around them as they rode was a bright reflection of the night before. Sunlight glinted at them in every direction, light bending through the ice and snow on the tree branches. Yuka felt an ache in her knuckles as she held tightly to these stirrups. Her stomach lurched with every bound of the animal, and she had to keep from ducking whenever they neared a tree with low-hanging branches. Her father had once been offered a southern steed of a different breed for riding from a tradesman that had come through their village. He had turned them down. "I am the only living thing I trust to do my traveling for me," Kupin had said. Yuka smiled at the memory, wondering what her father would say to see her now. She spoke his name onto the morning wind, hoping the green spirit would carry it to him. Talk was scarce as the two rode. Long breaths of silence stretched between the few times Lusa would call out direction. The steeds that carried them were not running at their full speed. Lusa called this sort of step the animals were doing a canter. The two animals carrying the men, jailers, as Lusa called them, were like the steeds that Lusa and Yuka rode, but much larger, less shaggy, and darker in coat. Yuka could hear their labored, almost angered breathing behind her. The great animals were heavier in step than her own, and harsher tempered. It had snowed before dawn the night before, but the day around was clear with bright blue shimmering amidst the dead gray of the sky above. Yuka could feel small droplets of snow melt from the tree branches fall onto her cheeks as the sun rose higher. Sunlight was at its crest when Yuka saw the first plume of smoke. Lusa called out over her shoulder and pointed ahead. She quickened the pace of her mount, and Yuka followed. She would be very grateful to get off her steed. Yuka's lower back had begun to ache terribly, and every step brought a searing pain to her chafed thighs. Down a smooth, steady slope, Yuka saw the beginnings of a small village up ahead. Tented huts, no more than a dozen, sat in a wide, snowy clearing. All were laid out in a haphazard circle with the thick war-pine totem making up the center. Yuka had feared for half a moment that she and Lusa were to witness another horrific sight of death like at the last village, where Aglu's spirit had gone to meet the grain. Yuka knew that she would never fully get the image of the mangled, charred bodies of those poor villagers out of her memory. This village was a different sight entirely. There was not a soul to be seen, alive or otherwise. Though the day around was bright, the tented homes built around the totem seemed dark and lifeless. One lonely trail of smoke could be seen, twisting into the dead sky from one of the larger homes on the other side of the clearing. Lusa kept her mount from the inner rings of the homes around. She called out over her shoulder. Yuka thought she meant to say something to her, but the words had been in Kamden. Yuka whirled her head around as she heard the whisper of long, curved steel on supple leather. The two jailers had drawn their swords and were looking around the village carefully. The one with the large mustache held a small Spitfire in his own hand. Yuka's hand found her unloaded Spitfire in her belt. "No one knows it's not loaded," she said to herself. "No one knows it's not loaded." Lusa beckoned them forward with a jerk of her head, and the party edged their mounts into the inner part of the village. Lusa spoke to Yuka from the corner of her mouth. "I do not know what awaits us here. If anything happens, ride back north, the way we came. You're no fighter, not yet." Yuka bristled at not being thought a fighter, but swallowed her reply. A bird, great and loud, called out. Both jailers and Lusa raised Spitfires in the direction of the sound, but Yuka kept her eyes forward. Her eyes had found two others. They were large and bright, and looked at her from behind a tattered tent flap in the home in front of them with a small plume of smoke trailing out. Yuka began to call out, but heard a large twig crack behind them. All spun in their saddles to see a large man with bright white hair and a face like old leather holding what looked like the largest and rustiest Spitfire Yuka had ever seen. It was leveled at their party. The large man waved the barrel of his Spitfire out at each of them threateningly. "Well, have you gone, then? Every one of you? There's nothing of value here." The younger of the jailers raised his Spitfire at the man, but Lusa barked out an order to him. The two jailers looked darkly at each other. Yuka feared that they might fire, but after a moment, the two lowered their weapons. "Who leads here? Where is your village mother or greeneress?" Lusa nudged her mount forward and put herself squarely between the jailers and the standing man. The old man kept his massive Spitfire leveled. He turned and spat in the snow. "Our greeneress died 3 summers ago, and my wife has led the few men and women left to us on a foolhardy chase in the woods for wicked warriors with white faces. I am what is left of the village." One of the jailers, the mustache one, grumbled something. Lusa answered him in the same tone. She then said firmly to the old man, "You are all that remains?" He is not," Yuka said, pointing behind her, fearing an ambush. "There is someone in the far hut." The old man's eyes widened and suddenly whirled the Spitfire at Yuka. "You'll die before you take them!" "Hold!" Lusa moved her mount in front of Yuka. "We mean you no harm, green brother. I am Lusa of the Song tribe. This is Yuka of the Halo. We mean to—" "Yuka! The God Rider!" The old man sputtered, interrupting Lusa entirely, incredulity crossing his face. He had eyes only for Yuka now. He seemed to notice her bright red hair for the first time. Your hair, your Kamden. He lowered the Spitfire slightly. What do you do here? Lusa turned in her saddle to look at Yuka. Her own eyes narrowed confusedly. Yuka? What is he talking about? Yuka was shocked to hear her own name spoken by this man she had never known. I don't... The old man spoke over her. I had a brother, younger than I, who was at your rising from the black. He's a tradesman in fishnets. When he returned south with your story, I thought him mad, a liar. Godrider? Lusa looked more nonplussed with every passing moment. The old man did not seem to take notice of her at all anymore. He was ever the storyteller, my brother. But he spoke true of it, right down to the copper rings in your hair. Oh, he will hate to have missed you. He had business in the south just 2 days before. The man brought the barrel of his Spitfire down. I am honored to meet someone of your spirit, child. His face, so fierce and leathery moments before, was now grinning from ear to ear. My people will take heart to know that the God-Rider has passed this way. My wife will sing to the green spirit from dawn to dusk on her return. I must, Lusa began, but Yuka spoke over her. You have my thanks and for your kind words, but I must ask who all is here with you. The old man gave a nervous look to the 2 jailers that still glowered at them from atop their horses. The children, their mothers take the warpath to the Red Wind, and their men follow. They are to return before nightfall. He gestured, and Yuka turned to see what had to be almost a dozen pairs of eyes looking back at her from behind the tattered tent flap in the far hut. She turned back to look at the older man. He laid a hand over his breast. I am Aklek, defender and husband to the village mother. We are of the Greenheart tribe. Lusa glared hard at Yuka. But Yuka stared at Aklek, keeping her eyes from Lusa's. You are brave to guard this village alone, Yuka said, still feeling Lusa's eyes boring into her. She did not know what brought about her next words, other than reckless foolhardiness. There is a caravan coming through here, with a great many people and steeds. We wish to pass through your lands unimpeded, with the blessing of your village. Aklek looked back towards the way Yuka and her party had come. The only danger I know of in these lands is farther up from where you came to us. Up that mountain there are dead faces that reflect the sky and take all who would live in the green up to the nothingness with them. 3 of our village were lost to these demons. 2 are cut down in the trees. 1 was taken. A child. His voice broke slightly at the last word. Yuka heard movement behind her. 3 of the children, who owned the eyes behind the tent flap, had come out of the tent to stare wide-eyed and red-nosed in the cold at the small party of newcomers. 2 were boys, and the 3rd was a girl. She was the smallest of the children brave enough to venture out, but she stepped the closest to Yuka. Yuka could not help but smile down at her. The girl smiled in return. Lusa soon took back control of the conversation. We have a gift for you and your wife when she returns. Lusa produced the wooden box from inside the leather satchel. These are elixirs and healing liquors from the south. You can use them for soothing fevered minds, or easing aches and joint pains, and for sleep. The man hesitated for a moment, then slung his large, ancient Spitfire over his shoulder, taking the box from Lusa. It is a gift from our caravan's leader, she said kindly. The old man then turned to Yuka. We are honored for your gift, he said pointedly to her. Yuka had to stifle a chuckle at the look Lusa had on her face. She's not, Lusa began, but Yuka bowed her head. I thank you for your kind words and your honesty. Tell your wife that I would have been honored to meet her. The man gave a bow in reply to hers. You have the blessing of our village to move through these lands. I shall tell my wife on her return, and you will have safe passage. Yuka thanked the man and turned to Lusa. Is there anything else we do here? Lusa shook her head slowly. Yuka nodded, knowing full well that she was soon to face fierce questioning. She nodded back the way they came. Lusa stared at Yuka for another long moment before turning her mount. The 2 of them led the jailers back up the hill. Yuka followed her. At the edge of the village, she heard a small chorus of voices call out. She turned and saw a multitude of children near the near the totem. They waved energetically, next to the smiling Aklek. Yuka waved a goodbye to them. Lusa kept her pace slow. Yuka brought her heels to her mount to catch up with her. "Godrider, is it?" Lusa said darkly. Yuka looked down at her saddle. "I did not know what to tell you about myself." "You seem to have a legend." "No, Yuka thought of her aunt's words at the beginning of this journey. "I am no legend, but others have spread one about me." "Have you ridden a god?" "No, not exactly." Lusa cursed under her breath. "You and I will have a very long talk over the fire tonight. I will urge you to be much less stupid in future. When someone says they know you, or know of you, in a land you are familiar with, it is best to tell them that they are wrong." Yuka did not reject the chastening. She knew that what she had done was reckless. "It caught me by surprise," she said meekly. Lusa kept her face forward. "You are lucky that the jailers in our caravan do not speak a word of our tongue." "Will you tell the others of the camp?" Yuka asked. Lusa shrugged. "What would I tell them? That our new attachment is some great northern legend? Do you think that means something to these southerners?" Yuka shrugged. "I will tell them nothing, unless I see fit. Until then you will be silent when working under the banner of Falhurst, his caravan, and myself. Do you understand?" Yuka voiced her assent. Lusa's voice remained stern. "Come, let us find the stream I've been hearing up the path. We need to water our mounts." There was indeed a small stream not far from where they were on the path. At the base of a small sloping waterfall was a shallow pool of clear water with ice formed at the fringes. All dismounted and brought their mounts to drink. The animals quaffed back huge amounts of frigid water. Yuka once more, after a long moment, heard the sound of a great bird call out. The jailers were busy taking drinks from the pool themselves, but Lusa turned to look towards it. "Go through the underbrush, legend, and see if you can find whatever bird made that noise. Perhaps it is large enough for our midday meal." Wanting to make up for her foolishness at the village, Yuka hurried forward, drawing out the long knife from Falhurst's from her belt. Yuka pushed past the snow-covered bushes. She heard the loud caw once more. This one was very near. The animal had to be just up ahead, behind a thick duskwood trunk. She had to lower herself and almost crawl under some of the lower branches. Standing straight, she stayed still, listening for more caws in the wind. None came. Sighing, Yuka turned to leave, and almost lost her footing, staring at what lay against the base of the tree. Bronze glinted beautifully in the midday sunlight. Its gleam was harmonized by a small flake of forest jade, all set into the tempered wood of a small killing axe. Yuka did not dare believe her eyes. At the base of this tree was her mother's axe, her fury. This alone was enough to make her believe she was seeing things, but what laid beside it completed the sight. Lying next to the blade, her mother had carried, and her father had given to her at the start of her journey, was a broken oar made of dark lurker bone. As ever, the story moves forward. And we'll just see what is in hand for Yuka next time.